I knew the exact moment the company was doomed. It was not when our stock fell, and it was not when they replaced the break room coffee with some organic green sludge that tasted like distilled disappointment and damp grass. It was the moment Zachary walked in. Zachary was the new chief technology officer, a 32-year-old venture capital experiment wrapped in a fitted gray vest, smelling of expensive sandalwood and unearned confidence. He walked into the conference room like he was Moses parting the Red Sea, except the Red Sea was just a room full of tired, middle-aged software engineers praying for a decent severance package. I sat in the corner, nursing a lukewarm paper cup of generic bean water, watching him survey his new kingdom with an air of absolute superiority. He had that clean-cut haircut and the kind of posture that comes from never having carried a heavy box in his entire life. I had been at Logicorp for 8 years. In tech years, that makes me a prehistoric fossil, a living dinosaur. I was the ghost in the machine, the guy who kept the servers from melting into slag during our high-traffic seasons. But to Zachary, I was just a graying guy in a faded hoodie who looked like he needed a nap. He did not know that without my custom algorithms, the entire delivery network would grind to a halt. The other guys in the room, developers who had spent years in the trenches with me, kept their eyes down. They knew what was coming. A new executive always means a new initiative, which usually means more work and less pay. "Listen up, team," Zachary began, clapping his hands together like a seal expecting a fish. "I have been reviewing our current system architecture, and frankly, it is legacy garbage. We are pivoting to an AI-driven, microservices-first ecosystem by the third quarter." He threw a slide onto the screen. It was a chaotic mess of circles and arrows that looked like a football play drawn by a toddler. I squinted at the screen, rubbing my tired eyes. He was proposing to delete the central routing gate of our entire logistics network. That legacy garbage he was talking about was the Atlas Flow platform. It was my baby. It was the code I wrote during the supply chain nightmare of 2022, fueled by pure adrenaline, panic, and too much cheap whiskey. That very code had saved the company from complete bankruptcy when the rest of the country was grinding to a halt. I spent 6 straight weeks in my apartment, barely sleeping, writing the core routing protocols that kept their shipping trucks moving. "Excuse me," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. I had not spoken in a team meeting in 3 months. Several heads turned toward my corner, their eyes wide with sudden concern. "That legacy engine handles 90% of our vendor compliance. If you delete that node, you are not pivoting. You are lobotomizing the business. The system relies on that gate to authenticate every single package that leaves our warehouses." Zachary turned to me, plastering on that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. He looked at my faded jeans, my work boots, and then checked his watch. "And you are?" he asked, pretending not to know my name. He knew exactly who I was. I was the line item on the annual budget that the financial director could never explain but was terrified to cut. He had seen my invoices, but he did not understand what they represented. "I am Jason," I replied. "I built the backbone you are trying to surgically remove." Zachary chuckled. It was a wet, condescending sound. "Right, Jason. Look, buddy. I appreciate what you did in the early days, but we are not running a history museum. We are building the future. Your monolithic code is holding us hostage. We need speed. We need agility. We do not need this patchwork, buddy." The word buddy hung in the heavy silence of the room. The junior developers stared at their laptops, terrified to look up. They knew what Zachary did not. They knew I was not just the lead architect. They knew I was not even an employee. Zachary was too busy looking at his reflection in the glass whiteboard to do any basic research. Back in 2019, when Logicorp was just a chaotic startup with 5 active lawsuits and a dream, they could not afford my consulting rate. I was a mercenary developer with a fee that made corporate officers weep. So, my lawyer, a sharp attorney named Hardcore Harvey, who ran his practice next to a tackle shop, drafted a different arrangement. I did not sign an employment contract. I signed a strict licensing agreement. I incorporated my own business, Sentinel Systems LLC, and licensed the Atlas Flow platform to them. They did not own the software. They only purchased a revocable right to run it. And like any smart landlord renting to a rowdy group of college kids, I kept the master key. I had built a separate verification server that checked the status of the license key every hour. If the license key was ever marked as invalid or expired, the core modules would simply shut down. It was a standard protective measure for independent software vendors. Okay, Zachary, I said, leaning back in my chair, letting my arms cross. You are the boss. Agility and velocity, I get it. We will see how it works out. Glad we are aligned, he smirked, turning back to his useless slides. The transition plan started almost immediately. Zachary was eager to show the board how quickly he could trim the fat and modernize the infrastructure. The weekly architecture sync meetings vanished from my calendar. The strategy sessions went on without me. I sat at my desk, listening to the muffled laughter coming from the glass-walled conference room just 10 feet away. Zachary was in there holding court, erasing my complex functional flowcharts on the whiteboard and replacing them with buzzwords like cloud-native mindset and holistic synergy. He was drawing big circles labeled AI and linking them to empty squares. It is funny how quickly a man can become invisible in the corporate world. 8 years of 90-hour weeks, 8 years of waking up at 2 in the morning to patch database leaks so the founders could buy their luxury cars and plan their vacations. And suddenly, I was just a ghost. People I had shared lunch with for years began avoiding eye contact in the hallway. They would see me coming and suddenly look down at their phones or turn into the break room. In corporate offices, getting terminated is viewed as a contagious disease. If you stand too close to the target, management might decide you are part of the infection. On Tuesday, Zachary introduced a new hire to the engineering group. Team, this is Hunter. He is our new product evangelist. He is going to spearhead our transition away from the legacy system and help us build a modern stack. Hunter looked like he was barely 25. He wore pristine white sneakers that had never touched a dusty server room floor and an expensive watch that he liked to adjust. He walked over to my desk holding a matcha latte, looking like a puppy who wanted a treat. "Hey, Jason, right?" Hunter said, smiling. "Zachary told me you are the legacy historian. I would love to pick your brain about the old database structure before we deprecate it next month." "Legacy historian," I repeated, spinning my chair around slowly to face him. "Hunter, do you know how the load balancers handle peak traffic when the API gateway starts throttling?" He blinked, taking a slow sip of his green tea. "Well, concept-wise, we just let the cloud provider handle that, right? It is all serverless now. We do not need to worry about the underlying iron." "Serverless," I sighed, turning back to my 3 monitors. "Because the cloud is just magic sky dust, not actual physical hardware, humming in a warehouse in Virginia that melts if you write a bad nested query." "Good luck, Hunter. You are going to need it." He walked away, looking thoroughly confused and slightly offended. I almost felt bad for the kid. He was walking into a technical minefield, with a map drawn by an amateur who had never written a production line of code in his life. By Thursday morning, my access to the staging server was revoked. I received a generic automated email stating my permissions had been updated by the system administrator. I did not storm into Zachary's office to demand an explanation. I simply opened my personal laptop, a beat-up machine that held the actual keys to their operations, and logged into the bank portal for Sentinel Systems LLC. It was the first of the month. The quarterly licensing fee for the Atlas Flow Core platform was due by midnight. Usually, the former financial director, Gordon, who actually read contracts, had it set to automatic transfer. But Gordon had been restructured out of his job a month ago, during Zachary's first wave of cost-cutting. I remembered watching Gordon pack his 20 years of service into a single cardboard box while Zachary watched from the glass office. I remembered how Gordon had spent his last day showing Zachary the financial audit logs, trying to explain why specific payments were automated. Zachary had simply checked his phone, nodding dismissively before telling HR to finalize the termination. In his eyes, a finance director was just as replaceable as a software developer. I refreshed the browser page. No pending transaction. I checked again 3 hours later. Nothing. I sat in the glow of my screen, feeling a strange mixture of calm and adrenaline. They were ignoring the invoice. In their immense arrogance, they assumed that because I sat in a cubicle and collected a regular check, they owned me and everything I wrote. They did not realize that the regular check was actually a retainer fee paid to Sentinel Systems LLC, disguised as payroll for tax convenience. They thought they were dealing with an employee. They did not know they were defaulting on their primary software vendor. I opened the contract files on my secure drive. Clause 3.1 was clear. Failure to pay the licensing fee within 24 hours of the due date constitutes a material breach. Clause 3.2 was even better. There was no cure period for willful non-payment or unauthorized modification of the source material. Zachary had already breached the modification clause by attempting to patch his new microservices directly into my core engine without my API keys. Now, they were defaulting on the payment. I could have walked to Zachary's office and warned him. I could have told him that he was about to shut down the logistics system that ran their entire business. But then I remembered the smirk on his face. I remembered the word buddy. I remembered how he looked at me like I was a piece of broken office furniture. So, I kept my mouth shut, closed my laptop, and let the clock run out. At 4 in the afternoon on Friday, the HR calendar invite popped up. The subject line was brief, quick sync. The location was Meeting Room B. It was the classic corporate Friday firing. They do it at the end of the day so the victim cannot cause a scene, and the remaining staff has the weekend to forget you ever existed. I did not panic. I spent 20 minutes packing my few personal belongings. My lucky screwdriver set, a few pictures of my old dog, and a small succulent that was barely surviving the office air on my desk. Then, I wiped my company-issued computer. I did not just delete files. I ran a thorough scrubbing program on the hard drive. I did not do it out of malice, but because I am a professional and I do not leave my personal digital footprint behind. I checked the Sentinel Systems bank account one last time. The balance was still zero. I put on my jacket, grabbed the manila folder containing my original wet ink contract, and walked down the long, quiet hallway toward the meeting room. Meeting Room B was a glass enclosure near the elevators, designed so everyone could see your departure. Zachary was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking like he was posing for a business magazine cover. Beside him sat Clara from HR, who looked like she would rather be anywhere else in the world. She had a stack of folders and a box of tissues placed on the desk. Her office was filled with motivational posters and small motivational plaques about teamwork and synergy, which felt incredibly ironic given what was about to happen. There was a box of tissues sitting on the corner of her desk, probably a standard fixture for these Friday afternoon sessions. She avoided looking at me, adjusting her glasses and shuffling the papers in her hands. "Take a seat, Jason," Clara said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. I sat down and placed my manila folder on the table. Zachary glanced at it, a smirk playing on his lips. He probably thought it was a portfolio of my work, a desperate plea to show him what I had built to save my job. "Jason," Zachary started, stepping in before Clara could speak. "We have been evaluating the team structure, and as we move toward this high-velocity, cloud-native future, we find that your specific technical background does not align with where we are going. We need developers who are agile and familiar with modern frameworks." "Where we are going," I repeated, nodding slowly, "like a train off a cliff." Zachary's jaw tightened, his smile vanishing for a split second. "We are terminating your position, effective immediately. Clara has the paperwork. We will offer a standard severance of 3 weeks of pay, contingent on you signing this non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. We will also need your building badge and your laptop." Clara slid the documents toward me, along with a pamphlet about unemployment benefits. The NDA was 10 pages long, filled with dense legalese designed to prevent me from speaking to competitors or sharing any details of my time at the company. It even had a clause about not disclosing my own salary or the details of my termination. I knew that signing it would lock me into a corner, giving them all the power while I walked away with a measly check. I did not touch the papers. I did not even look at them. "Just so we are clear," I said, my voice quiet and steady, "you are ending our professional relationship right now. That is what this means." "Yes," Zachary said, crossing his arms. He wanted me gone. He wanted my budget allocation to hire 3 more young developers who would not question his buzzwords. He thought he was being a decisive leader. "Fine," I said. I pulled my security badge from my pocket and slid it across the table. I took the company laptop out of my bag and set it down beside the badge. I am no longer connected to this company as an employee. I accept the termination. Good, Zachary said, straightening up. Security will escort you from the premises. We will mail your final paycheck. Hold on, I said, placing my hand on the manila folder. We have finished the employee discussion. Now we need to talk about the vendor relationship. Zachary frowned, his eyebrows knitting together. What do you mean by that? What vendor? I opened the folder and took out the licensing contract for the Atlas Flow platform. This is the active licensing agreement between Logicorp and Sentinel Systems, LLC. It was signed in 2019 and renewals happen automatically. I do not work for you, Zachary. I never did. My company owns the software that runs your procurement, your warehouses, and your shipping routes. I was merely the on-site technical support included in your premium service plan. Zachary laughed, a short, dismissive sound. He picked up the document, glanced at the signature page, and tossed it back. This is old garbage from the startup days. We own everything you wrote while you were sitting in that chair. It is standard corporate intellectual property assignment. We own the code, Jason. You cannot just claim our core systems belong to you. I have seen dozens of developers try to pull this kind of stunt when they get fired, Zachary added, shaking his head. It never works. Our legal team will have you tied up in court before you can even hire a lawyer. We are a multi-million-dollar corporation, Jason. You are just one guy. Actually, I said, pointing to the highlighted text on the page. Read paragraph 4. It clearly states that all software, architecture, and algorithms remain the exclusive property of the licensor, Sentinel Systems, LLC. The licensee, Logicorp, is granted a non-exclusive, revocable license to run the software, contingent upon timely payments. If you look at the addendum signed by the founder, my transition to a regular payroll structure was for tax and administrative convenience, but the intellectual property rights were never transferred. I own every single line of that logistics routing engine. I watched Zachary read the paragraph. I saw the moment the words registered in his mind, though his ego struggled to accept them. In his world, developers were just resources, and companies owned everything they touched. He looked up at Clara, then back at the paper. This is ridiculous, he growled, his face reddening. Get out of here before I have security throw you out. We will let our legal department sort this out next week. I am going, I said, standing up. But you should know that you missed the quarterly licensing payment last night. That is a material breach. And according to Clause 6, unauthorized use of the platform after a breach results in immediate suspension of the license. You have 48 hours to cure the breach, but since you just fired the only administrator who knows how to maintain the server links, I doubt you have that much time. The system will automate the enforcement. I walked out of the room. I did not look back. I walked past the cubicles, past Hunter, who was staring blankly at his laptop, and out to the parking lot. The evening air was cool and crisp. I got into my old Ford F-150, threw the folder on the passenger seat, and drove away. The truck engine rumbled reliably. They thought they had fired a worker. They did not realize they had locked themselves out of their own house without a spare key. I stopped at the local store and bought a bottle of cheap whiskey from Gus. Gus was a veteran who had run the liquor store for 20 years, and he had seen enough tired working men to know when to keep his mouth shut. He just slid the bottle into a brown paper bag, nodded, and said, "Have a good weekend, Jason." I appreciated the quiet respect. It was a stark contrast to the corporate chatter I had lived with for the past 8 years. Then I went home to my small apartment, which smelled of copper wire, solder, and old books, and set up my desk. I was not going to hack them. That would be illegal. What I was doing was simple contract enforcement. I opened my personal computer and logged into the remote admin portal for Sentinel Systems, LLC. The Atlas Flow engine on their servers pinged my server every hour to verify its license status. For 8 years, my server had replied with a green signal. The dashboard of my Sentinel Systems interface was clean and simple, a contrast to the cluttered, over-engineered tools Zachary had tried to implement. It only did one thing. It monitored the active licensing keys and allowed me to manage the access rights with a single click. On my screen, the status indicators were all green, database active, shipping portal active, automated procurement, online. But the license status had shifted to grace period. The countdown showed 40 hours remaining. Zachary had ignored my warning. He probably thought the contract was a bluff, that I was just an angry old engineer throwing a tantrum. He did not understand that I wrote the software to protect itself. I changed the setting from grace period to strict enforcement and queued the revocation command. I did not execute it immediately. I wanted them to have the weekend. I wanted Zachary to enjoy his weekend, to tell his friends how he had modernized the department. The real crisis would hit on Monday morning. When their transaction volume spiked, my phone buzzed. It was Toby, the junior developer. Zachary is telling everyone he saved a fortune by letting you go. We are putting in a ping pong table next week. Everyone is celebrating. I smiled and typed back, "Do not sign any long-term leases, kid. You might want to call in sick on Monday morning." I spent the weekend resting. I slept late, went to a local diner to eat eggs, bacon, and hash browns, and did not check my messages. The diner was a local landmark, with worn red vinyl booths and a jukebox that had not worked since the 90s. The waitress, a woman named Martha who had worked there for 30 years, kept my coffee cup filled without me having to ask. I sat there in the quiet booth, reading a local newspaper, feeling completely disconnected from the corporate panic that I knew was brewing at the LogiCorp office. The alerts started small. Just a few notification pings on my burner phone, indicating that the Estonia database replication server was experiencing minor latency. Then, by Sunday evening, the notifications turned into urgent emails, stating that the main logistics hub was failing to communicate with the verification server. I sat on my couch, sipping my whiskey, and watched the alerts pile up without any intention of replying. By Sunday night, my mind was made up. On Monday morning at 5 minutes before 8, I sat at my desk and looked at the interface. The offices would be opening. The warehouses in 2 states would be logging in to process the weekend orders. Millions of dollars of shipments were about to queue up. I hovered my mouse over the button. "Paragraph 4, I muttered, and clicked the mouse. The screen updated instantly. The status indicators turned a dark red. Inventory offline. Vendor database access denied, shipping gateway failure. The cascading red text was a work of art. At 3 minutes past 8, my phone began to buzz. It was the automated pager system, which I had forgotten to mute. It reported a critical database outage. At 15 minutes past 8, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again and again. I could picture the scene. Warehouse workers standing around because their scanners could not connect, delivery trucks lining up at loading docks, and customer service drowning in complaints. At 8:30, Toby sent a text. "Everything is down. The screen says license invalid, contact administrator." Zachary is screaming and actually kicked one of the server racks. I smiled, eating breakfast. Kicking hardware is the classic sign of a manager who does not understand technology. At 9, the office mainline called. I put it on speaker. "Jason, this is Zachary. We have a massive system failure. We think it is a malicious logic bomb. Did you leave something running on your way out?" "I do not work there anymore, Zachary. I turned in my computer. I have no access. Do not lie," he yelled. "The screen says license invalid. What did you do?" "Ah, the license. Did you pay the Sentinel Systems invoice?" "We are not paying that extortion," he spat. "It is a legal contract, Zachary. Since you did not pay, and since you terminated the support personnel, the software automatically deactivated itself. Turn it back on right now, or I will sue you for everything you own." "Zachary, you are currently running unlicensed proprietary software. My lawyer is preparing a cease and desist order. If you try to bypass the lock, you are violating federal law. Do you think a gray jumpsuit suits you?" Silence followed. Then, I heard Sylvia, the head of legal, telling him in the background that the contract was binding and they were liable. "Just fix it," Zachary pleaded, his arrogance gone. "We are losing $10,000 every single minute." "That sounds like a management problem," I said. "I do not work for free. Put the chief executive officer on the phone. He is in a board meeting. Then drag him out because in 15 minutes, the automated payment gateway will attempt to process supplier transfers. Without the encryption keys, the system will lock them out. Your entire supply chain will be dead." A moment later, Edward Thorne, the CEO, came on the line. Jason, what is happening here? Good morning, Edward. Your CTO locked you out of the house, and now you do not have the keys. Edward tried to play the family card. Jason, we have worked together for years. Zachary made a mistake. He is young. We can resolve this. Come back, and we will double your retainer. I do not want to raise Edward, and I am not coming back. That bridge has been reduced to ashes. Then what is this? Blackmail? It is a vendor negotiation. You have two choices. Option A, migrate to a new platform. Zachary thinks he can build an AI system in a weekend. Let him try. It took me 6 years to perfect the Atlas Flow engine. Option B, buy the intellectual property of Sentinel Systems LLC outright. I will hand over the keys and the source code, and you never have to see me again. Fine. How much? $3,800,000. That is insane, Edward shouted. It is exactly 1% of the revenue my code saved you during the shipping crisis, plus a small inconvenience fee. You have 30 minutes before the automatic compliance script archives and purges the active customer database to protect user privacy. We would not want you holding data on an unlicensed system. You programmed it to destroy the data? I programmed it to comply with privacy laws, I lied. It was actually just an archive script. We will pay, Edward said, his voice collapsing. Send the documents. I sent the digital agreement. 20 minutes later, I checked my bank app. The pending transaction showed a deposit of $3,800,000 from Logi Corp. I logged into my terminal and entered the command to update the license status to perpetual. Within minutes, the system was green again. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the offices of Zenith Logistics, Logi Corp's largest competitor. I wore a nice suit, not a hoodie. The engineering director, Roy, met me with a grin. Jason, I heard you sold Logi Corp the ashes of their own system. I simply enforced a contract, Roy. Strictly business. We need a new compliance engine, Roy said. Can you build it? I cannot copy the old one, because they own it now. But that old system was written in Java 8. In my spare time, I have designed a new architecture using Rust. It is faster, more secure, and will run circles around them. It will make their $3 million system look like an abacus. How long? Roy asked, his eyes bright. 8 months. But I need a dedicated team and absolute autonomy. No arrogant managers, no product evangelists, just me and engineers who know what they are doing, and my fee will include equity. Roy smiled and shook my hand. Welcome to Zenith. The new system launched 8 months later and took over the market. Logi Corp's stock fell 45%. They were stuck with a legacy system they did not understand, maintained by terrified junior developers who were too scared to touch a line of code. Zachary was demoted to special projects in the basement, where he could not touch anything important. He eventually left to promote cryptocurrency. As for me, I am sitting in my new home. I replaced the old office coffee with top-grade espresso. I have a large screen dedicated to old movies, and the manila folder is framed on my wall, right above my desk. Paragraph 4, the paragraph that bought my freedom so. The next time some young manager in a vest calls you buddy and dismisses your work, do not get angry. Just read the fine print. Make sure you keep the keys, and if you have to burn the house down, make sure you charge them for the matches.